Chapter 1, Part 3, Scientific Thinking. It is important to realize that science is not simply a body of knowledge or a list of facts to be remembered. Science exceeds just memorization. It's an intellectual activity encompassing observation, description, experimentation, and explanation of natural phenomena. This is an active process with trial and error involved and research experiments that try to figure out what is going on. Scientific literacy is the process of thinking scientifically. It's using knowledge that we gain to make wise decisions about the world around us. This process is increasingly important, especially with the current state of media. We need to be able to use scientific inquiry and to think creatively about real-world issues so that we can figure out what's actually going on. We need to be able to communicate our thoughts to others and to back those thoughts up with actual scientific data. We need to integrate all of this into our decision-making process so that we can make wise and informed decisions about the world. Biological literacy especially is essential in the modern world. A brief glance at the news will show us that there is biology all around us. From recipes to modern medicine to forensics, all of these things are biology-based. As a citizen, you need to be able to figure things out and to have some level of biological and scientific literacy so that you know what's going on. It's very important that we search for the science behind the claims that we see on the TV and on the news. So, I want you guys to ask yourself, how do you know that is true? Every time you see a scientific-based ad, you need to look for the science behind it. We can do this by looking for the scientific method. So if we dig deeper behind an advertisement or a claim made in a headline, we can look for the scientific method being used to properly explain what's going on. We can also look for statistics that are used properly. Statistics are a set of analytical and mathematical tools designed to help researchers gain an understanding of the data they gather. It can help us summarize data and determine if there's actual differences between the two types of data that we look at, or if differences are due to random chance. We run statistics on our data to help us analyze what's going on so that we can draw conclusions. Conclusions based on limited observations are risky. For example, if we were to draw conclusions based on these two celebrities, we would conclude that females are generally taller than males. We know that that's not true. If we take a larger sample of many people in the population, we see that the average female height is much lower than the average male height. Here's another example. We can look at students who have access to their textbook, and we can ask the question, does having access to a textbook help a student perform better in biology? After the experiment, students who had access to a textbook scored an average of 81% plus or minus 8% on their exams. Those who did not have access to a textbook scored an average of 76% plus or minus 7% on their exams. If we look at the range of these two sets of data, the people who had access to their textbook have a range of 73 to 89%. Those without have a range of 69 to 83% on their exams. These numbers overlap heavily. We need to run statistics to see if these averages are actually different or if they are just due to random chance. Another thing statistics can help us with is identifying relationships such as correlation between two variables. A positive correlation is usually a linear trend. As one thing increases, the other increases. Negative correlation shows a decreasing line. As one increases, the other variable decreases. No correlation shows no relationship between the two. However, correlation is not causation. Just because two variables are correlated does not mean that one is causing a change in the other. For example, When there are more firefighters at a fire, the fire is larger and causes more damage. These two things are correlated positively. However, we cannot conclude that firefighters are making the fire worse. So, statistics help us to organize and summarize data and help us to look for relationships, not always causation. As scientists and citizens, we need to look for the truth behind the claims. Sometimes there are claims made that are not necessarily based on scientific fact. For example, a playoff beard is grown during the playoffs for hockey players. Some people believe that these beards are good luck, and if you shave it off, your team will lose the playoffs. Some people throw salt over their shoulder to help ward off evil spirits, and many people believe that four-leaf clovers are lucky. These are examples of superstitions. A superstition is an irrational belief that actions that are not logically related to the course of events can influence their outcomes. The idea of superstition and relating illogical actions to outcomes was tested in the lab using mice. This device was set up so that these mice could push a lever and gain food. To start with, the mice pushed the lever and immediately were given food. The next round of experiments, the mouse pushed the lever, there was a delay, and then the food dropped. The mice began to believe that whatever they were doing when the food dropped was what caused the food to drop. Some mice went to the corner and touched their nose, and then the food dropped. They thought that touching their nose to the corner was what caused the food to drop. Others had weirder behaviors, such as running circles or touching every corner before the food would drop. People often develop superstitions to help them try to explain things that are beyond their comprehension, or as a means of comfort for strange things that are happening in their lives. Clinical trials generally have a solid base of scientific evidence behind them. However, sometimes big companies make claims that are not backed up by science. Others do not see a point in running these scientific trials, such as this CEO who says that people are really not scientifically minded enough to be able to understand a clinical study. One case that came to light recently were the deceptive ads by Dannon yogurt. One claimed that Activia yogurt relieves irregularity and helps with slow intestinal transit times. Another claimed that Dan Active dairy drink helps prevent cold and flu. It was shown that these ads were deceptive and had no substantiation or actual scientific data behind them. The scientific trials were not run. They just made these claims to sell the food. This is an important lesson to learn, that just because something is on a label doesn't necessarily mean it's backed up by scientific facts. There are two kinds of false scientific evidence that we should watch out for when watching in the media. The first is pseudoscience. These individuals make scientific sounding claims that are not supported by trustworthy, methodical scientific studies. This could be like our Dannon yogurt case. The second thing we need to watch out for are anecdotal observations. These are based on one or a few observations of people that then draw conclusions without actually doing scientific studies. In the media today, we see lots of examples of bad science. Many of these claims and headlines rely on anecdotal evidence and pseudoscience to try to bring people into their belief. One such case was a study done correlating the MMR vaccine and autism. The MMR vaccine treats for mumps, measles, and rubella. These are 3 related diseases that cause problems such as rashes, fevers, and often lead to other complications. The initial link between the vaccine and autism came in 1998 when a small study of only 12 children who had bowel problems were looked at. The study showed that 8 out of 12 showed signs of autism after receiving the MMR vaccine. Why is this bad science? One of the first things that should jump out at you is this study has a very small sample size. 12 children is not a very large sample. Another thing to look at is this study was not looking for the correlation between the vaccine and autism. It was studying the bowel disorders in these children. So where did this scare come from? Vaccinations cause autism. This claim is unsupported. The suggestive statement came about during a press conference with one of the authors of the study. Later, the article was declared fraudulent, and it was shown that the author who made this claim was paid off by big companies to say such things. However, the damage was done. The media ran with this idea that autism is caused by these vaccines. However, many studies have come out since that time looking for a correlation between these two variables. In Denmark, between 91 and 98, there was a study comparing autism in 440,655 children who were vaccinated and 96,648 unvaccinated children. This is a very large sample size. No statistical difference was found between these two groups, meaning that there was no correlation between the vaccine and autism. In Japan, in 1993, the MMR vaccine was stopped. In 2005, a study was printed showing that the incidence of autism continued to increase, even though this vaccine was not being used at all in that country. Another study, recently published in 2015, looked at children with autism and their siblings, as well as children that were vaccinated and unvaccinated. Again, this study found no correlation between the vaccine and autism. Why is this such a big deal? Why is it important to vaccinate, particularly with the MMR? From 1956 to 1960, an average of 450 measles-related deaths were reported every year. Measles often causes other complications as well. An average of 150,000 patients had respiratory complications, and 4,000 had encephalitis, the swelling of the brain, each year after having mumps, measles, or rubella. The latter was associated with a high risk of neurological problems and death. Though mumps, measles, and rubella themselves may not have been the true killer, the complications that resulted in catching these diseases could be severe. 1 in 20, especially children, would catch pneumonia. Pneumonia can be deadly in young children or the immune compromised. 1 in 1,000 would have brain swelling, which could lead to death. 1 or 2 in 1,000 go deaf. 1 or 2 in 1,000 die from other complications. Another long-term problem was a disease called SSPE, a very rare but fatal central nervous system disease that resulted from measles virus infections. This disease develops 7 to 10 years after the person has measles, even though a person can seem fully recovered from the illness. Before 2000, 4 to 11 people in 100,000 would develop SSPE after catching measles. With the initiation of the vaccine for MMR, we see a drastic drop in the number of cases per year of these diseases. Vaccines work by harnessing the power of our own immune system. Vaccines introduce dead or weakened versions of the disease. This causes an immune response so that our body makes antibodies that recognize that particular disease. The next time our immune system comes in contact with that disease, our body is ready for it and fights it off before we even start feeling sick. The problem with vaccines is that some vaccines are unable to be given to certain parts of our population. For example, young babies cannot get the MMR until they are close to 2 years old. Other children, such as cancer fighters, cannot have vaccines either because they are immune compromised. So, how do we protect babies and other people who have immune compromised systems? Herd immunity is when a large group of people are vaccinated and cannot catch a disease. This means that the few who are unvaccinated are not likely to catch the disease because they will not come in contact with it. The more people that are vaccinated, the greater the chance of protecting those people who cannot have vaccines. The anti-vaccine push has caused a rise in the cases of mumps, measles, and rubella in the United States. In the year 2000, we had eliminated this disease in the United States. However, in years subsequent, we have seen a rise due to more people being unvaccinated. This is one case of how bad science has caused a big problem. Many later studies have shown no correlation or link between autism and the MMR virus. We know that getting measles can cause complications leading to death, especially in small children and the immune compromised. It's important for us to look for the true science behind such claims and be educated and make rational decisions based on that science to help us be safe and keep those around us safe. A final point I want to make for Chapter 1. There are limits to what science can do. We have said that science is empirical and subjective. This brings us to the idea of ethics and morals. Sometimes there are problems with science and ethics. This is why hospitals have ethics boards. Although the scientific method may be the most effective path toward understanding the observable world, it cannot give us insights into the generation of value judgments and other types of non-quantifiable subjective information.